Hello everyone, this is Josh Rubio. We're going to be doing a demo video launching two AWS EC2 instances. We're going to be putting one in a certain region, one in another, and we are going to be connecting them remotely via secure SSH. So what is AWS EC2? So it's Amazon's elastic compute within the cloud. It's the most basic level of compute in terms of VMs, virtual servers in the cloud. You can launch from any AWS region, as well as there's several types. You have compute optimized, general purpose, as well as their pricing. But specifically, we're going to be doing a very basic launch of an EC2 instances in two different AWS regions. So this is what the demo is going to be based on in terms of the multi-region EC2 launch. We're going to be putting one EC2 instance in the US East 1 region in Northern Virginia, and then we're going to be putting one in the AP Northeast 1 in Tokyo. So we're going to have two separate EC2 instances in two different regions. So it's going to be a multi-region demo. There's three ways to communicate with AWS APIs. You have the console, you have the SDK, and then you have your CLI. So we're going to launch this EC2 instance in the US East 1 region all through the console. We're going to give it the name Virginia Server. We're going to use the OS Ubuntu Linux, and we're going to download the 22.04 version for this instance. We're going to give it the instance type of a T3 micro, a very basic instance type. We're going to create the key pair. We're going to name this East1 key pair. We're going to pick ED25519, and we're going to make sure that we pick a .pem file. So this is going to be the private key that's downloaded to the client computer, and you're going to see it go to the the right hand corner. So that is now downloaded in our computer, our client computer. And then we are going to change the network settings to make a security group so that only our client computer, only our IP will be able to remotely access this server. So I am using a VPN for this demo. So any IP that you see is either not related to my internet or it is of the instance. So just keep that in mind just for some extra security precautions. And we're going to hit launch instance, and we're going to do the same thing for the server in the Northeast 1 region in Tokyo. Name it Tokyo server. We're going to use the Linux OS of Ubuntu 22.04. We're going to pick an instance type of a T3 micro, very basic. Create the key pair, then we can go ahead and make the same network settings, allowing SSH traffic from our IP, putting that security group description, and then we're going to hit launch instance. So as you can see, we have our instance launched in Tokyo as well as our instance launched in Virginia. And at this point, we are going to be taking those downloaded private keys and we're going to be putting them in a directory called SSH. So once they're in that directory, we can then change the read and write rules for those files, just giving it a bit more security as the owner of this client. Then we can change the mode to 600 or be able to read and write these files. This gives it that extra security and gives it the extra barrier for our private keys to be able to use it to get remote access to the servers. So at this point, with both EC2 instances launched in Tokyo and one in Northern Virginia, we can now remotely access the US East 1 region first. So what is SSH? SSH is a secure shell protocol for secure remote login to a server for remote access. Uses public and private keys for authentication and encrypts all traffic, client and the server, both ways. And you have two keys. You have a private one on the client, and then you have a public one with the server. If all keys are set up, it eliminates the need for password. So if I am on my client computer right here, I can secure shell login through the server with my private key here on my client computer and the public key over there on the server. They will check and make sure that I am on that approved list, and we will no longer need the password. Instead, it's very secure through a key pair. So essentially, this is what the demo is going to look like. We have two EC2 instances in two different regions, so a multi-region architecture. And we're going to have our client that I'm going to be using here on my Mac, And I'm going to be using SSH to remotely access each server, and I'll probably just do a test to make sure that I am actually in that server, and essentially if anything were to break, this is how you would access this server in the most secure way. You're going to need your private key as well as the name to the server and its IP. So we're going to need those three things, and once we have those, we can enter in the command to gain that remote access and to start the SSH session. And as you can see, we are in the US East 1 region server. We're going to make a couple directories, we're going to exit, and then we're going to come back and see if they are there. So we're going to re-enter that server, and as you can see, we're going to do ls, and we're going to see the file that we just made in the previous SSH session, as well as the file I made in that directory. Side by side, you would notice when you gain remote access to the Tokyo server, it is much more laggy, and it's because there's higher latency from the client, or at least for me in the United States, to reach that Tokyo server. Once we enter that Tokyo server, right, we have our Northeast 1 key pair, as well as the name for that server and its IP. We're going to make a couple directories, just like we did with the other server. Exit, come back, and we'll see if they are there. ls, we're going to see our directory. We're going to get into that directory. We're going to see the files within that directory. And another neat thing that we can do is, since we know that this server has quite the latency from where I am, we can run a trace route ping to the US East 1 server that we just created, and we can see the latency jumps that it has to make it all the way to the eastern United States. So when we make that ping from the Tokyo server all the way to the US East 1 region server, we can see that the latency jumps to nearly 160 milliseconds from what was 1 to 2 milliseconds on the first couple hops. So it just gives you a bit of a perspective of how far the server is, and a neat little trick to gain some insight on how far we are remotely accessing this Tokyo server. I really appreciate if you're still watching. You can find my connections in the bio, as well as I'm going to make a GitHub repository for this entire demo here. So if you didn't understand something, it'll be in that repository where I'll have screenshots as well as all the commands that I used. Yeah, I hope you learned something new, and you can find my connections in the bio. Yeah, take care.